Right. Order in the court! Order in the court! Hello there and welcome to VR Court. Judge Ekron sitting to hear the crimes against Mr Sprett. Mr Sprett is accused of committing murder in the first degree. He is accused of killing another red panda who attempted to mate with him. Mr Sprett, how do you plead to these heinous crimes?
Not guilty, Your Honor.
Not guilty. Very well then. We have heard a not guilty plea from the accused, Mr Sprett, and therefore we shall move on to a judge-based trial. I will be the judge, jury, and if required, executioner. On the defence stand for the lawyers, we have Mr Bourne, who I believe is fairly experienced with his lawyering. And on the prosecution stand, we have two new lawyers straight out of law school, Mr Swift and Mr End. Tell me, which one out of you two will be acting as the lead prosecutor in this case? Who's going to do the most talking, basically?
I will.
I would let the wolf do it.
Well, they both look like wolves to me. I don't see species.
I mean, the one that's more intimidating.
Is it another drink at work?
Yes, why not? Well, Mr End has claimed he will be the prosecuting lead lawyer in this, so Mr End shall lead most of the arguments with Mr Swift's assistance where required. Right, we have heard the crimes against Mr Sprett. My court assistant today is Mr Dimpley, a very experienced assistant who will behave, otherwise he will find himself putting the lotion on again. It puts the lotion on its skin! Not on me, you freak! Anyway, I will now be dismissing the lawyers into the back room to collect their evidence. The prosecution are to use podium 1 to 4 for their evidence, and the defence is to use podium 5 to 8. Now, I'd just like to let the prosecution know, I believe the defence already knows this, but 1 to 4 for the prosecution.
What podiums?
1 to 4.
1 4. Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to let the prosecution know that, as it is their first case, you are basically doing theatre. Your task here is to prove that Sprett is guilty by telling a believable and entertaining story that fits in with the evidence you add to it. Take my urethral comb, for example. You must bear in mind that there may be changes to your case based on what the defence comes up with, and yeah, basically do the best you think you can do. Mr Patrick, I accept that you are there as the court ghost today since they have gone on vacation, but I must politely request that you behave. Although scaring Sprett is always worth bonus points. Right, before I dismiss the lawyers, does the defence have any questions?
Not really so far, except I was wondering though, Sprett, he was accused of murder, I got that, but you said something about fucking another red panda or something?
He is accused of murdering another red panda who attempted to mate with him.
Okay, alright. Now I got it.
So entice him, got it.
Do the prosecution have any questions?
As of right now, no.
Very good. In that case, gentlemen, you are dismissed into the back room to collect your evidence. Mr Dimpley, would you be kind enough to accompany them and make sure there's no foul play? Answer any questions any lawyers have in there. Being very noisy there, Mr Dimpley. Very noisy. It's okay, though. I love you. So, without further ado, believe it or not, we are actually ready to begin this court case, which is a terrifying concept. So, I have spoken enough. I am going to hand the floor over to Mr Bourne to present his opening statement for the case. Mr Bourne, the floor belongs to you, and as the more experienced...
You want me to start?
You have seen how cases go, so yes, I would. Opening statement, old boy.
Gonna move down. So we got my client here accused of murder. I want to stress to the court that Sprett is innocent because, in fact, the fact that he's been around the victim is not very weird at all. Wait, I'm allowed to present evidence during opening statement, or is that after?
After opening statements. This is just a short, concise statement about your case, no evidence.
This person had a very good relationship with the victim, and although there has been drama in the relationship, nothing would ever cause him to do any harm to his victim, because he's a very successful person in the baking industry and he has a lot of friends in this community. It would not make sense for him to want to do something like this over this. They have both been very depressive lately, and I think this would just be a very sour end for both of them that would not go in any of their favor. That's why I believe that my client is innocent.
Okay, thank you for your opening statement, Bourne. Nice, concise, and very informative without giving anything away. I look forward to your case as you are going to present it. Now, I believe it was it Mr. End or Mr. Swift who was acting as the main lawyer here? Or are you both just going to do it?
Adrian, myself.
Adrian, right. I'm going to refer to you as Mr. N from this point forward. I tend to just refer to your naming game. So, Mr. N, if you will be kind enough to present your opening statement to the court.
I'll keep this quick for now, but while you did say that he was a very successful individual, and also the prosecution is saying that it's going to be a murder in the first degree, we have not only the evidence, but the backing behind us to prove that not only was it a murder, but we have the reasoning behind it, and the proof that it was premeditated, as is a first-degree murder case. You did state that he was a very affluent individual that has a very good baking career, and that is going to be playing a huge role in our case, giving that the whole reason behind the murder was to keep his own name clean and to keep a lot of his, let's say, friendships intact.
Ooh.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that's it for me.
Thank you for your opening statement, Mr. N. Well, I must admit, I think I may have underestimated all of the lawyers involved in this particular case. I'm rather looking forward to this now. Yes, I think everybody may have underestimated the prowess of these lawyers coming out of brand new lawyer school. So, I did say I would allow the lawyers to decide who will present their case first. So, lawyers, if you'd like to take a short moment to discuss who would like to present first, the prosecution or the defense. Mr. N, Mr. Swift, the floor belongs to you. You may begin.
I apologize, I'm quite tired today, but
Aren't we all?
the case that we're going to prove to both the judge and the court floor is the fact that not only was Sprett married, but he murdered his, well, let's just say his secret little mistress in order to preserve his name, as well as his career. Judge, can you bring up evidence number 1 for me, please?
Evidence number 1.
Not the best picture of it, but it is the wedding ring that the alleged mistress purchased for him to try and steal him away from his already beloved wife. They have been recorded being seeing each other for about a year now. The wife herself had no idea of this relationship, at least as much as we are able to tell at the time being. Judge, can you bring up number 2, please? At the time, November 9th, 2020, that is a cigarette and a lighter that has the DNA of the alleged mistress found at his place. I believe it's 100 Yorkshire Road is the place that you're currently staying at. This was found in his bedroom, so it has been proven that she was around his house at the time, about approximately 2 days before the alleged murder took place. Now, Judge, can you bring up evidence number 3? That is Sprett's cell phone that we were able to collect. It is now broken because he left it at the scene trying to destroy and tamper with evidence, because it had a long list of text and recorded messages between the two of them. The place that it was found was actually a forest outside of town. The messages we were able to recover was a small little log between them, sending pleasantries. But the last one did seem kind of off, and it was off mostly because it was out of the blue and asking her to meet at a different location, which is where her body was found. Judge, can bring up evidence number 4. That is the knife, coated with not only Sprett's fingerprints, but DNA evidence of the actual female that was murdered. And it was found at the same location that the cell phone was broken and tossed to the side. Now, given all the evidence that we've been shown today, the timeline that I'm piecing together, and we would like to...
Objection.
Go ahead, Mr. Bourne.
I would like to remind you that I might have heard wrong here, but you said it was DNA evidence of the female, but I also thought you said there were fingerprints of the accused on it. I would like to remind you that if we're even gonna get close to having something that incriminating already at the main stage, first of all, we'd have to use the thing there to check for fingerprints, and also I'm a bit unsure if it's not a bit unfair to bring up something that incriminating already in the beginning. But that just might be me. I don't know. It would be up to you.
The latter point is technically irrelevant, Mr. Bourne, as the prosecutor are allowed to present their case as much. If they'd come out with every single weapon in there and said he used that with an army of pacifist vegans to kill her, that would technically sit if you didn't object to it. However, the fingerprint point, which I'm glad you brought up, because if you hadn't brought it up, it would have been accepted as fact, has been brought up, and therefore we must test for fingerprints of Mr. Sprett on the knife. Now, of course, we are a very organised courtroom here, which is why I walk on the table. So this device is fantastic. It already has the fingerprints from the knife in it. We just need to program it. Yes, that's the right setting. So now we're going to send this over to Mr. Sprett. Right, Mr. Sprett, if you'll be kind enough to please do the fingerprint test, claw print, whatever kind of print.
Bean print.
The fingerprint is a match. His fingerprints have been found on
No,
the
no,
knife.
no.
It was a double match.
That was
Fingerprints
your
were
finger.
found.
It was your... No,
You-
no.
Mr. Sprett, Mr. Sprett, are you,
Oh my god, sorry.
Mr. Sprett? Mr. Bourne, might I suggest you keep your client in check? Now, if Mr. Sprett doesn't start behaving, then I'm also going to say that his fingerprints were found on the mobile telephone based off this. Are you going to behave, Mr. Sprett? Right. His fingerprints were found on the mobile telephone and the knife. Both tests were very, very successful.
I didn't do it.
Please,
No, no, no,
stop,
I
please
didn't do
stop,
it.
please stop, please. Fuck you, Sprett, you're gonna destroy this one.
I was trying to move myself. I didn't go for it.
Now, of course, finding fingerprints on a mobile phone that belongs to the person who owns it is not unusual at all. So, bearing that in mind, the prosecution's case that the fingerprints were found on the knife in the woods is correct. I can't pick my bloody gavel up, it's being stupid. Mr. Dimpley, would you mind attempting to pick my gavel up? I still can't hear you. Sorry about that. So, Mr. End, if you will be kind enough to carry on with your case. Thank you for your objection, Mr. Bourne.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Allow me to collect myself for a second.
Welcome to courtroom. It's always hilarious in the worst possible ways. It's like Gary's mod, just worse somehow.
Oh my god, don't remind me of Gary's mod, Judge.
Oh my god, that guy over there,
Fucking
fucking hell.
on that game.
Oh my god, I've got like 3,000 hours on that fucking game at the moment.
Getting back to the timeline that we have been building. Sprett had realized that the mistress that he had been seeing had been getting a little bit too clingy, to the point where he would have to either ditch his wife for her, which would have caused a huge problem within his already well-made career, within his very well situated life. So he did the next thing that he thought was logical, which was to take out the one form of the problem. However, he did not expect us to find it. So, judge, jury, if there is one, as well as the crowd, we believe that this is, in fact, a premeditated murder, as in a murder in the first degree. And that is it, Judge. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your case, Mr. End. I must admit, out of all of the new lawyers I've seen recently, that's possibly one of the most comprehensive and not god-awful things I've heard in the past month. So, well done on that one. Genuinely covered all the bases. Very pleased. And now I'm going to hand the floor over to Mr. Bourne, who does have a very tough act to follow, but I have no doubts whatsoever will be able to follow up very successfully. Mr. Bourne, the floor now belongs to you. Mr. N, Mr. Swift, you may object as you see fit.
First, I would like to point out that the fact that the victim knew each other pretty well. Now, I want to stress that this was not just a casual relationship they had. It was a very serious one. And yes, although behind his already existing wife, this one was considered a bit more serious because of the complications he had with his wife, because she had actually been a bit abusive. Now, you did mention the fact that these people were around and messaging each other on the phone. That would have been normal, and for them to meet up at certain locations would be normal too, especially around the house. Now I don't remember exactly which evidence was which evidence, but I guess we can bring up the flower to begin with.
Is
I
that
don't remember
podium
which
number
one that
5?
was. Maybe I don't remember which 6.
No, number 6. Number 6 for that.
No, that number 6. This flower was sent over by the victim, so to say, or in this case, the killed one. Right at the time before the murder, as a kind of a gift for their actual relationship. And I find it hard to believe that something like this would happen right before that happened. They had a bit of time, they were going to meet up, but it was not to kill them. I would also like to refer to one other evidence, if you bring up the baguette, the pièce de résistance.
Number 8, that one. That was a good guess.
This one is pretty interesting. Now, we did forensic testing on this one, and this bread was newly baked, and his fingerprints, not fingerprints, sorry, his DNA was all over it. I'd rather not bring up the fingerprint stuff, because, yeah, you know. His DNA was all over it. That means that during the time, he would not have met time to premeditate and, so to say, prepare for the murder, because he was busy baking. That's his job. That's what he does. Why would he start going around thinking, oh, I'm gonna murder this person, I have to prepare? That means he wouldn't have time to premeditate the murder the way the prosecution would have said it. Now, I would also like to bring up...
I'm going to go ahead with your objection, Mr. End, as you finish your point, Mr. Bourne.
Oh, well, in that case, I was going to bring up another evidence.
Mr. Bourne, I'm letting him go ahead, Mr. Bourne.
Alright.
I would like to point something out to your argument here. And I also have a question for the judge. Am I allowed to ask questions?
To a point, yes. If you take it, yeah, basically, because we're not doing normal procedure, which would be your badgering and so forth. I will allow you to question things, but if you get too stupid, I will reprimand you. And I will allow the other lawyer to refuse to answer a question, although it may judge poorly against him if he does, unless it's something really stupid like what colour's your underpants.
I will answer that, to be honest.
What colour are your underpants?
Baby
They're grey.
Grey. He looked as well, which means he's not wearing any clothes. Right, carry on, Mr. End.
That's true as well.
I gotta collect myself.
Right, order. I do love a good court case, but Mr. N, begin with your objection, old boy.
You said that the baguette was made during the time of the murder. I'm asking for evidence of that it was made during the time of the murder. And the second question I was asking was, you said that the only way that you had so far to prove that Sprett did not murder this lady was the fact that they had such a previous relationship to begin with, which we did point out.
And the time
I just want to
frame.
know how that specifically doesn't constitute, or at least constitutes, his innocence.
Doesn't constitute it innocent indefinitely, but it circumstantially proves that it makes it harder to believe that he would be out for it. Just a circumstantial evidence, nothing conclusive. And the baguette, I did mention that we did testing on it, found his prints on it, and we also found out that the baguette was recently made by that sense. So that means that not fingerprints, DNA on it.
Okay.
Okay.
Fingerprints would have to be tested, remember?
Do you know what we're going to do here?
Yes.
It's going to be another numbers game, but this time we're going to implement the critical victory, which means if somebody actually guesses the number, they win outright. So, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10. Mr. Enders, you're the one that's brought up the objection here. What number am I thinking of?
4.
Mr. Bourne, what number am I thinking of?
5.
Mr. Bourne has technically won, meaning that this was made fairly recently. However, it was what we would quote as a poor victory. So we know he made it, but we only know he made it within 2 hours of the murder, according to the test reports. Carry on, Mr. Bourne.
Okay.
It was a poor victory. The number was 9. If you got 9, then it would have been he made it as she died, but you didn't get 9, so.
I guessed 9, but I didn't say it out loud.
That's bullshit, but okay. I got a poor victory there. Fuck it. Okay.
So you get for picking
next
5.
evidence, the key. Now, I would like to point out that the victim who died had access to. This is the key that was found on the victim. This key has access to the victim's places. Now, this is more or less of a global lead, can access pretty much any storage or household that the defendant owns. This once again means that them being around each other unheard of, around each other's house, is not really too suspicious of fact. This would be normal and common stuff for them. Moving on, I have more evidence, and I actually forget sometimes what evidence I had, but I'll remember once I see them. I had like 4 evidence, and I brought up like, how many of them now?
3. So do you want the last piece of evidence, Mr. Bourne?
3.
Yes, bring up the last piece of evidence.
The last piece of evidence.
Which is?
The pills. We discussed this earlier on. Or whatever it is,
We
Mr.
did
Bourne.
discuss this
You
earlier.
tell us what it is.
Now, here is the thing here. You mentioned that the defendant, so to say, used a knife to kill this person. And although I have to remind you that this knife is one of the common household items used by Sprett when he actually makes his bakery stuff, so that the fact that his fingerprints would be on it is not too surprising. And also, I want to stress out that these pills is something he uses to relax himself when he has his deep depression that we talked about. However, this medication is not just any form of relaxing or making you happy. This literally relaxes your muscle to the point where hard work, which involves like stabbing somebody, wouldn't really be possible. Movement in general would not be able to be that fluid on such a big scale. Sitting and working in a bakery, that could work, but stabbing somebody to death like that wouldn't physically be possible having taken these pills, which he had.
Just before I let your objection, Mr. Bourne, heads or tails?
Heads.
Okay, your objection there, Mr. End?
Can you prove that he took those pills prior to the murder?
Yeah, that's what the whole thing of the coin toss is gonna be here. That I
No,
have
it
proof
wasn't.
or not,
Okay.
I guess.
No,
Yeah,
it
that's
wasn't.
what I
The coin
figured.
toss was something else.
Okay. Well then, yeah. Can you prove that he took those pills prior to the murder?
Yeah.
Considering
what
that
I
we
mean,
have
yes.
evidence that
Yeah,
shows him being there at that time, and not just
All right.
in his home and a
Are we
remote
doing
location
another
in the
number game
forest.
for this then? Is this another numbers game?
Alright, so I guess if I get the numbers right, it proves that yes, I have proof for this. If not,
So, what
Then I
my
don't
understanding
think-
here... Hang on a moment.
Judge.
Yes, Mr. End?
Just a game question here. He could verbally argue. He could bring up something. It doesn't have to be a numbers game.
It doesn't have to be a numbers game, no, it's just a suggestion that is on the table if he doesn't want to argue it.
Fair enough.
well, I'm gonna leave it up to you guys all here to decide. Defendant, prosecution. Do you rather have a number game, or do you rather want to try to argue about it?
I'd rather try to argue about it.
What do you say?
No speaking in a foreign
I don't-
language in the
I
court,
didn't hear
please.
you.
That's very, very unfair.
Я наговорю по-русски.
No.
Blodprøve.
What?
I can't hear you. What?
Blodprøve.
Я наговорю по-русски. Ты говоришь по-английски?
No,
Ben, you're an IT
I don't
consultant!
understand. Come on, guys, stop.
Okay.
You're gonna get us in more trouble by speaking foreign language. God damn it, my case is gonna be smeared. Okay.
It's
So
okay,
are we
Mr.
doing a
Ball.
verbal argument about this? Or are we doing a
I
number
would
game
prefer a
again?
verbal.
Try to verbally argue it, Mr.
Alright, let's
Bourne.
do a
If I'm not
verbal then.
convinced, we'll do a numbers or a coin toss.
Alright. Go ahead. Why can't I prove that this is done? Alright. Go ahead. Say why this isn't provable.
Are you asking me?
Yes. You're the one that refuses this, so prove me wrong, so to say. And I'll try to argue my case.
I'm the
for
one
it.
that's asked you if you can prove it. So I want to hear you.
Okay, so what the prosecution here is asking... What the prosecution is... It happens.
Hold on.
What the prosecution is
Alright,
saying,
then I
Mr.
will bring
Bourne,
up some more stuff.
is you've said that he took these pills. Prove it.
Alright. Then I will have to make up some more stuff. Now, first of all, I want to make sure to know that this depression has been diagnosed. He has had contact with medical examiners and doctors about it, so this is not like a thing that is unheard of. Then I also want to mention that forensic test has been done on his body and stomach contents and blood to note that he had taken this and it was in his system at the time at the murder would have taken place, in the time lapse from where the murder would have taken place, before and a bit after. So
My
in doing
understanding
this
of
would have
these
been very
pills-
hard.
My understanding of these pills, the way that these actually work, they only last for about 8 to 12 hours. So what you're telling me is you got a blood test of the defendant within 12 hours of the murder?
Yes, of course.
So you knew that this happened, and you're saying that the murder actually did take place.
Look here, if it happened 12 hours and you arrested him literally after the murder, then of course
Well,
it's
we did not.
believable
We
that we
only
could have
picked him
done the
up
test within this.
a few
Okay,
days
well
ago.
that still counts to me as you could have done the forensic test when you picked them up.
I mean, by the sounds of it,
Well,
what,
then now we have a problem.
if
with-
I
now we
may
have a
interrupt
problem
here
with
for a
when this happened.
moment, if I may call order here, what the prosecution is saying is that Mr Sprett was only picked up a substantial amount of time after the murder, which means any forensic tests that were done at the time would technically be irrelevant, since at least a week would have passed from the murder to Mr Sprett's arrest, which means technically the knowledge of the pills in his system
Okay.
aren't necessarily scientifically backed. Now, I have the databanks for the
There's no way
pills.
that
They're
to
called
prove
Spretticus pills, and they do as you say. They relax the body massively to the point where if you take too many of them, you will literally empty your bowels everywhere. It is a problem with this type of medication, but it does exist. So you are correct that the medication would do that and may technically incapacitate Mr. Sprett. However, what the prosecution is saying is because Mr. Sprett was picked up a substantial amount of time after the murder, we cannot ascertain as to if the pills were in his body at the time. I believe is the argument the prosecution's making.
Alright, fair enough then. There is really no way to prove it then.
This may be something
Okay,
to
the only
ask
way to
in
say
witness.
it would be
Witness-
a
without a shadow of
finger
a doubt.
point.
This may be something
only
to
gets-
ask within the realms of witness questioning.
Yes, or do a fingerprint scan of the thing, but I guess that wouldn't be relevant either, so we don't know when the fingerprint was made either. So no. Alright, yes, we'll ask the witness then. Alright.
Okay, Mr. Paul, do carry on, old boy.
Then we carry on again. Well,
If you've got anything
According-
else to add.
to my... Well, I'm just gonna summarize a bit more. I think that the time frame I tried to put up here makes it hard for him to do it. Being incapacitated would make it hard for him to use the knife as a murder weapon in this case, and I think it's unreasonable for him to want to lose all of this over something like this. Especially since they had a pretty good relationship. I don't see it ending like this. Even though there might have been complications for it. That's all I have to say.
Okay, well in that case then, Mr. Bourne, thank you very much for presenting your case. And two genuinely interesting cases put forward there from both the prosecution and the defence. I thank you most wholeheartedly for your contributions. I've vastly enjoyed it, and I'm not just saying that. I will unmute you soon, Mr. Timpley, I promise, but right now you're just a muted little child. So... yes, well done, the pair of you. We're now going to move on to the next facet of court, which is, of course, witness questioning. Now, we only have the one witness, who is Mr. Sprett himself. Mr. Sprett, of course, is the accused, so everything he says needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, but we can assume that he will tell the truth in court. I will be the end judge of that, of course. So we will go through the procedure as I have explained. Mr. Sprett, I have noticed you've had your hand up for an excessively long amount of time, and I kind of mocked you for a bit, but I'm going to ask you, do you have a question before we carry on?
No, I have a new question. Can I speak to my lawyer before we do the questioning? A small break.
Will
Oh,
the
yeah.
prosecution allow the accused to discuss with his lawyer?
Yes.
Yes.
Very well. I will grant a 5-minute recess for the prosecution, the defence rather, to speak to his lawyer. You may head into the back evidence room. I will keep it unlocked for you. Prosecution team, I'm going to politely request that you go out in the hallway so you cannot hear what they are discussing. Thank you kindly. Court, thank you for your patience. We shall continue once the defence
Order in the
team...
court!
Order in the court! If we could please have everybody returning to their standard positions. The break has come to an end. Mr. Bourne, are you content with the conversation that you have had with your client?
Yes, we are prepared for witness testimony.
Lovely. And is the prosecution prepared for the witness testimony half of things as well?
More so than ever.
Lovely. Well, in that case, I thank everybody for their patience in this matter. To be fair, that's one of the first times we've ever had lawyers actually ask for a break to discuss things halfway through a case. So there's lots of firsts this week. I'm really rather enjoying this week when it comes to court. So we shall now move on to the next aspect of court, which, as I said, is witness questioning. Now, the only person who is a witness in this case is Mr. Sprett himself. The wife, as I'm far aware, is not in the picture in relation to witnessing questioning because I didn't bother looking into it. So that's the way things go. So, Mr. Sprett, before that you can offer any kind of testimony in this case, you must be sworn in via the Pledge of Honesty. You must repeat the phrases that I say. Are you ready?
It's kind of been active all day.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you post in the Discord?
Bitch. I, Sprett,
I pray.
silence in the court, please, for the Pledge of Honesty. Silence in the court, please.
No,
Promise to tell the
Silence
truth.
in court, please.
We're in courtroom.
Promise to tell the truth.
Promise to tell the truth,
The whole truth.
the whole truth,
And nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Also, I have a confession to make.
Also, I have a confession to make.
Because I, Sprett, have come to the realization
Because I, Sprett, has come to the realization
that even though Norway is amazing,
Norway is amazing.
Sweden's just better.
Who's on his way?
Oh dear.
Who is?
But yes, you say it now, come on.
Sweden's just better.
Say it.
Mr. Sprett, you will be found in contempt of court if you do not repeat the pledge. Please repeat the line as follows. Sweden's just better.
Okay, Sweden is okay.
You know what? Considering that's coming from a Norwegian, that's like an Englishman saying Scotland's better than England, although it totally is. So I will accept that. Thank you, Mr. Sprett. I know I'm going to regret that later on. Mr. Fenn, if you'd be kind enough to take a seat again, please. Mr. N, as the prosecuting lawyer, I'm going to hand the floor over to you to start your questioning of Mr. Sprett. You may ask him exactly what happened, or basically any question you want, including what colour his underwear is, if you so desire. Mr. Bourne, you may object to questioning as you see fit, following the objection rules. The floor is yours, Mr. End.
Yep.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Sprett, November 17th, 1900. What were you doing at that time?
Well, that's a long time ago, I don't remember.
Well, that was the time of the murder.
Oh, was it? I was at the bakery.
You were at the bakery. What were you doing at the bakery that day?
Baking bread.
So, do you own this shop, or are you just an employee?
I own it.
And you own it. So, as an owner, you yourself go back and bake the bread? Don't you have employees for that?
I have a small shop. Yes, I bake myself, and I have employees.
Aiden, if you're gonna talk, you gotta whisper.
Okay. Another question for you. How long have you been struggling with this mental problem that you've been having?
I've been doing that for a long time. At least 2 years.
2 years now? And according to your defense lawyer, you have actually sought treatment for it? Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. The medication, as brought up by the defense, has been described as debilitating, so much so you can't work or do heavy lifting. My question for you is, how are you able to complete your... Oh.
Go ahead with your objection, Mr. Bourne. I'll allow it.
We never said that it made it completely impossible for him to work. I clearly stated that he can work, but he cannot move in a greater area or commit some really heavy pushing or stuff like that, like you would have to do when stabbing somebody to death. That is what was said.
A relaxant of sorts.
Yes, it is still a relaxant, but within a bakery, you still do have to move large amounts of wheat and flour. You do still have to be in hot kiln or
He
hot
has
environments,
co-workers.
whereas
No, no, I
can
relaxants
help
would make
him.
that much more difficult to work in. So my question
no.
for the defendant would be, how is he able to work under said medications if they are so debilitating?
Because I'm standing
Yes,
still,
okay.
baking my bread, and I get my employees to bring me different, you know.
That
things
should have
I
been a
need.
pretty obvious answer, to be honest, prosecution.
Mr. Bourne, no snippiness needed, thank you.
Sorry.
That's my job.
They have employees do most of the work. Okay. How is the relationship with your wife?
We are doing
Your wife, specifically.
fine.
Fine?
Yeah.
As
Oh, boy.
I had heard from the defendant's opening statements, it was actually pretty rocky, as if she was abusive.
No. She's not abusive, she's more kinky.
Kinky. Okay. For your confidentiality, I won't push that any further. So, how long has this other mistress been in the picture? And how many people other than yourself and her know of it?
It's me, my wife, and the people I work with. They know about it.
So, everybody knows that you're committing adultery.
Yeah.
Well, it's not, something like that. But you know, my wife doesn't care. She do the same.
She would do the same. Commit
She
adultery.
does.
This is getting interesting.
You're okay with this. She doesn't mind.
Polyamorous.
Interesting. Polyamorous, exactly. Sorry, I should be quiet.
Yes, you should. Thank you, Mr. Bourne.
That is all.
No further questions? Very well. Thank you for your questioning, Mr. End. Very interesting questioning there. Learned some interesting facts. Mr. Bourne, would you like to cross-examine the witness?
Indeed, I would. Quite a few questions.
The floor is yours, Mr. Bourne. Mr. End, Mr. Swift, you may object as you see fit following the objection rules.
Thank you, Judge.
Okay, Brett. Now, I wanted to bring out the fact that you mentioned that you were pretty good on terms, but yet it was established that you weren't really good on terms, but you said she was okay with this. Does it mean she was doing this behind your back, or that you were both agreeing that maybe we should do fornication and stuff like that? See if things get better for us or something in that sort.
Yeah, me and my wife was kind of experimenting, meeting
Okay.
peoples.
Okay, so you were both okay with the fact of this, so she had no problem with you doing this other person.
Of course, I would never cheat on my wife.
Alright. Now, the prosecution brought up that you had your cell phone there and it was broken, kind of as if you did that to incriminate the cell phone. But is that really what happened? Can you explain a bit from your perspective what happened there, without lying?
I guess I just lost the phone.
Just lost it?
Yeah, I think I was watching some memes or something, and I guess
That
it's
doesn't really
fell out-
explain how it
out of
got
my
broken.
pockets or something.
No, it just broke out of your pocket. So do you mean that it accidentally
Abstain,
broke
Mr.
down?
End. Abstained, Mr. End. Mr. Bourne, please finish your point.
Oh, okay. Alright, so you
Back
mean
again?
it fell
Oh,
out of your
never mind.
pocket and it broke because of that. So it wasn't you intentionally breaking the phone to destroy evidence or anything. It was just an accident.
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
Break my
Mr.
phone.
Bourne,
Alright,
Mr.
well-
Sprett,
It is
Mr.
expensive.
Bourne, Mr. Sprett. Mr. End, you
Yeah,
can
that
go
makes
ahead with
sense.
your objection at this point.
Can you ask the defendant how it was found at the scene of the murder?
We already know this. The phone was found on the murder scene, not murder scene. It was found in his bakery, I would assume, before he left to go to the
It
murder
was
victim.
not. It was found at the scene of the
Broken.
murder. He ditched the evidence there.
Did
The-
they say that?
prosecution
I don't
did
even
bring
remember
that up in their case, and it was not counted by an objection, and therefore was entered into the record alongside the knife as found. Also, the fingerprints of Mr. Sprett were found on it, although that's not to be considered uncommon, considering the fact that it's his mobile phone.
That's not uncommon.
But it was found at the
DNA
scene of
was
the
also
murder.
found on the knife.
Yeah.
We know it was.
The
Mr.
So
DNA
then I
Sprett.
gotta
was
ask
on
you
the
then,
phone.
And I
Sprett.
lost.
Then I
I lost the
then I gotta
phone.
ask you, Sprett.
Order!
Okay, then I
Order!
gotta ask you, Sprett. Is it
Everybody
possible-
appears to be talking over each other at this moment in time. I'd rather like to keep that to a short, if you will.
Okay. So I would like to ask you, Dan, is it possible that you brought the phone with you to the murder scene in hope that it might be able to fix it, rather than just leaving it at home, or that it would start up or anything? Maybe you're the kind of guy who likes to bring your stuff with you in either case.
I'm not sure about that one. It might be just a
Well, it was
crackhead.
found at the murder scene.
Pick up
You
the
must have had
phone.
some reason for bringing it with. Huh?
Oh, the murder scene. Oh, why?
The phone was found at the murder scene. How would it land up on the murder scene if you were to drop it at your home before going there? Why would you bring the phone? You think it might fix itself? Or that it wasn't
I'm not
entirely
sure
broken, you could
about
use
this
it?
one.
Concerning.
Let's
Anyways,
come back to
you
that
were
later,
sent-
maybe.
Okay, then I'm gonna move on to my second question. Now, you were going to meet up with this person at some place. We never discussed it thoroughly what the place specifically was, the location or names, so we're just gonna remain it
Would you-
anonymous for the time being.
Would you like me to
Thank you.
retell you?
No, did they actually outline
I
exactly
did, yes.
what the place looked like?
I do
All right, tell me
remember
again.
roughly what was said, and I do remember a place was mentioned away from the house, but I don't recall any further details.
It was
That's exactly
a
what I
remote
thought, too.
remote section of the forest outside of the town that he stays at.
That
I
does
don't
correlate.
remember that being specifically detailed. That's correlated.
Yeah,
I do remember
Alright.
that.
Yeah, that was
Okay, in
stated.
that case. Alright, then it was stated. Alright.
Sorry if
So
I
you
didn't bring
went
that
out there to the forest to meet this person. What was the intention behind this? Was it some bad intention like the prosecution, or was it something different? What is your opinion about this?
Well,
Why
we
did
were
you go out
meeting
to meet
up,
her?
having a picnic, a little date, just me and her.
A picnic and a date. Interesting. Okay, so you were going to hang out and just casually have fun after all of that.
I like this episode.
Interesting.
Yeah, of course.
Alright, well that makes sense. You were still good on each other, unlike you and your wife, who was still having your problems, although agreeing on stuff. So, then again I have to ask you, the murder weapon was found there with your fingerprints and DNA on it from the victim. Now, how would this be possible? What really happened down there? How did the murder victim end up dead and you became the target for this accusation?
Well, that's first of all, that knife is, of course, mine, because the knife from the bakery. It looked like.
Abstained, Mr.
But
End.
when I was leaving the forest, of course, I left before her because she wanted to stay back and clean up.
Okay.
I had to go basically.
You left her to clean up
She
on your
packed
own.
She packed the
Nice.
food. She packed up the food and the different stuff, and I just left.
Okay, one moment before you carry on,
And,
Mr. Bourne and Mr. Sprett. One
well,
moment. Mr. End, you may state your objection.
Okay.
I'd
What's
like
that?
to point out a little bit of a problem in his statement. Earlier, answering one of my questions, he stated that he was baking at the time of the murder, and now he is speaking of a picnic that happened within the forest.
No. I would like
These
to remind
timelines
you
do not
that
match up.
I would like to remind you this, that you said this murder was first of all premeditated. I say that prior to this he was baking, meaning that it would be hard to fully prepare for a murder of this within that
Born,
time
with
span
all
of
due
ba-
respect, I'm
baking.
not talking about what you said. Born, with all due respect, I'm not talking about what you said. I'm talking about what the defendant said. The defendant said, at November 17th, 1900, the time of the murder, he said he was baking. Now he's bringing up a story completely different from what he told me earlier, which was he was picnicking with this mistress outside of the forest, outside of town.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yes.
When you say it like that, I don't know what you meant with that. If you meant that at that day you were baking, or if your exact time frame where the murder happened you were baking. Because if you said that, boy, that's very wrong to say it.
Oh, I thought I was baking that day.
At that time,
Yeah.
I asked you a specific
I
time.
was at the
He asked you specifically at the time.
I was
So
baking
that's
that
what you
day
gotta
at the-
pay attention.
I was at the bakery that day.
You were at the baker at that
that
day, but at
time?
the time of the murder, did you bake when she was killed, or was that
You know,
not
at
when
the
you?
time of the murder, I was at the bakery. I was at the bakery
Oh my
because she was
God.
alive and I left. She was alive and I
Mr.
left,
Sprett?
and then I went straight to the bakery.
Mr. Sprett,
Okay, that can actually make sense then.
you were asked specifically
So, if I
where
got
you
it
were,
right then.
Mr. Bourne, Mr. Sprett. You were specifically asked where you were at the time of the murder, and you answered that you were baking. So now you're saying that under the force of this medication, you went out, had a picnic, didn't empty your bowels, and immediately went off to bake, and she was murdered whilst you were gone, using a knife that you probably wouldn't have left behind if you were baking, because we know chef's knives are quite expensive.
I didn't get to finish my story. Can I continue?
I will allow you to continue your story, but I'm at the point of dismissing you as an unreliable witness, Mr. Sprett. Please finish your story.
Oh my God, why spread? Okay,
Well, it
may I
cut
ask
me
you
off.
this then?
Allow Mr. Sprett to finish his story, please,
Can I
Mr.
ask
Bourne.
you a question now? Okay, finish your story.
Sure. Sure, ask me the question and then I can continue with the story.
If you say so. Okay, so you say this, that after you were done picnicking with her, you went back home, and you say that she was killed when you were at the bakery. Then how can you explain she actually getting killed there? Do you have any idea what might have killed her there?
That was what I was gonna to continue saying. When I left the forest on going back to the bakery, I met one of my employee who was going into the forest. We didn't speak, but we crossed paths. That man. Hold on.
Don't bang your head for my
Panda
sake.
problems.
Me and
Yeah.
that employee, we had some discussions. We wasn't really at good terms. He had problems with me having 2 girls. He was a very Christian boy who did not accept that kind of behavior.
And he enforces that upon you, his boss. That's some kind of balls you have, so to say. Alright, go on.
Oh yes, I sure like balls.
We all like balls, don't we? You know, after this, if I get you acquitted, you know... I mean, what? Don't record that, please.
Mr. Bourne, we may be furries, but I'm the only one that sends porn to people on Discord, so I'm going to ask you to move away from that point, and I'm going to allow Mr. N to state his objection.
It was a joke
All right.
objection. Go on.
Right, order in the court, order in the court, courty law order. Please carry on, Mr. Bourne, Mr. Sprett. My patience is wearing a little bit thin.
Okay, so you were not on good terms with this guy. Keep going.
I met him when I went out of the forest and he went in. He was carrying this paper bag, which is basically my paper bag from the bakery, where
A paper
Yeah.
bag?
different. Very
That must be one
When you
hell
buy-
strong of a paper bag.
when you buy bread, you put it inside the paper.
A bread bag.
Yes.
Bread
A bread bag, yes.
We know what you're talking about.
That makes sense.
Or I do.
Yes. Yes, because you have plenty of those, don't you?
We clearly did not have any bread in it, but it looked like it was kind of formed like it was carrying tools.
Oh. Alright. Well, this is getting interesting. Keep on.
That's pretty much it.
That's all it. So you saw him walking up to the forest with the girl, wearing bread and tools, and you didn't find it suspicious. You didn't want to like stop him or take a further look and see what went down. You just went back and started baking again. The
I
guy
wanted to
who
bake
was
bread.
this pissed off at you. You wanted to bake bread, and the guy that you are not good terms with comes up with a paper bag which looks like stool it towards the girl you're fucking and
Mr. Bourne,
just pick
Brett,
Mr.
before it
Bourne,
goes.
might I remind you that you
Oh,
are
you
the
stupid man.
defense lawyer and not the prosecution lawyer?
I know I am not the prosecution.
Now,
but
normally-
I have to point this out. 'Cause
Normally, one moment, Mr. Edge. Normally, I advise that the defending lawyer is allowed to tell his client to shut up, but in this case, Mr. Sprett, you may tell your lawyer to shut up if you want to.
please tell me to shut up, because I'm gonna ruin this as well.
I like breads more than girls, okay?
All right,
Objection.
thank you. We get that. You get that cleared up now.
Mr. End, I will allow your objection if you so desire.
Yes,
Uh,
object. Why
I
not?
was going to say something, but I believe Mr. Bourne did enough talking.
Yeah,
I'm
Miss-
actually going to
pretty much.
stop. I
Bourne.
apologize for hitting the button.
I'm going to allow you to ask one more chain of questions, and then I'm going to politely request you draw your questioning to an end. It's been a very interesting questioning session. We've learned a lot of interesting information. I'm
Yeah.
sure the prosecution would like to re-cross-examine the witness after this new information. But, Mr. Bourne, you may ask one more chain
sure
of
of that,
questions.
huh?
Or you can sit down, whichever you prefer, old boy.
Now I gotta ask for you. Do you want to die? This is first-degree murder. We're looking at death sentence here. No, I'm done. You can answer the question.
Okay.
Oh.
Thank you for your
Audible
question,
gasp,
Mr.
audible
Bourne.
gasp.
Damn.
Mr. End, would you like to re-examine the witness, bearing in mind the new information that has come out, or would you like to leave it standing for interpretation by the judge?
I would love to cross-examine. Judge.
You may take a stand and cross-examine at your own free will. Mr. Bourne, you may object as you see fit, although once again, you are the defending lawyer, not the prosecuting lawyer.
I know. I'm not gonna help him anymore. But he would have said the same thing anyway.
Go ahead, Mr. End. Go ahead.
Honestly, Mr. Bourne, yes, I would have said the exact same thing. So, I do appreciate your helping me out. Regardless, though, Sprett, I do have one very quick question for you. Can you give me a brief description of the employee as well as his name and his record with your company?
He's a white man. He's around 150 feet.
115 feet.
centimeters,
So
I
you're
mean,
saying he's 115 feet tall?
150 centimeters.
We'll allow that to pass. It's Siren Head!
That's like a volley size.
Siren head.
Right, okay, apologies, that was my fault. Order! Order in the court! Mr. Sprett, please continue to answer the question.
I'm sorry, I'll be done with this in a bit.
I don't know how long a feet is, I just know centimeters. Okay, 150
You
centimeters.
don't just say centimeters.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Oh,
And he had bear. He had a bear down to his kneecaps.
Okay.
And it was...
Interesting that he would have such a long beard. I know that hair can be pretty problematic when it comes to the food industry. How does that work out with your company then? With him having such a long beard?
Yeah, nets.
And that's a net that large for that big of a beard?
Custom made.
I'm sure you have standards for that company. I know a lot of cooking places or restaurants will have actual regulations when it comes to beards and hair. Do you just allow anybody to have that long of a beard?
Have you seen all the fur on this body?
Fair enough.
Valid argument.
For that's a valid argument. I forgot who refers. Anyway.
He's not, but you know.
Yeah, I'll let that one
Keep
go.
on, keep on.
And what was his record with your company?
What?
What has his track record been with your company? How long has he worked there? Is he a good employee? What sort of reasoning would he have to commit such an act against you? That's what I'm trying to get at.
He worked for me for 2 years. He has been a priest for longer than that, if I remember. He just
So
came out
he's a
of jail.
priest, and he's been working with you for over 2 years now? But he has quite an investment into your company. Why would he want to frame you for such a murder?
As I said before, he didn't approve me having 2 girlfriends.
So the only motivation that this employee would have is just the fact that he didn't approve of you having 2 girlfriends, and he never spoke with you about it?
Well, of course, as I said before, we did speak about it, and he didn't like the fact that I had 2 girlfriends. So that's basically it.
Seems like quite a length to go to for murder.
Well, you know,
What?
if you're a highly Christian person,
As I'll judge.
Christian extremist or whatever.
Okay then, and I'm not going to give the defence the opportunity to re-examine the witness because I don't think there's any particular need to do so. I do believe the questioning was more for
I agree.
collaboration and just doubling up on things. So we're going to draw our witness questioning to a close. Thank you, Mr Sprett. I know the Pledge of Honesty said that the Swedes were superior, but I must admit I'm not quite so convinced anymore. I may even feel a little bit sorry for that. So yes, that was witness questioning. As I did mention earlier on, the facet of court that always tends to take the longest period of time, but one of the most enjoyable and some very interesting information coming out. I mean, it's almost like in that short break the defence came up with a story, so very interesting. But nonetheless, it's been done, and what has been done has been done. So we're coming on to the end of the case at this point, and we will now move on to amendments. As I mentioned before, amendments are short and simple. If you have heard information that changes your case and the way you have presented it, amendments are the time to tell me and change your case. If you make massive amendments, I may not accept them, and opposing lawyers may object to amendments. However, at the end, it is the judge's decision if your amendments will be accepted. So, I'm going to allow the prosecution first. Mr. End, do you have any amendments you'd like to make to your case as you have presented it? No is an acceptable answer.
Honestly, at this point, I don't feel like we need to amend anything.
Okay, thank you, Mr. End. And moving over to the defence, Mr. Bourne, do you have any amendments you wish to make to your case, bearing in mind that no is an acceptable answer?
I'm not gonna say no. I want to make all amendments I could to this case to turn it around for me, but that's not gonna happen. Dude.
At least be realistic.
Don't laugh at me. I'm being realistic and... Oh, okay. But I'm gonna think about one thing then that I can try to amend and try to change, but I guess it's gonna be up to you if you wanted to change that. Now, I want to change one thing though. If possible, I want to change the fact that we can somehow have proof that he was under the influence of that drug. If it's possible in any way. That's a big change, but it's gonna be up to you to change it. If anything,
We already proved
Mr.
that
End?
he wasn't.
Mr. N. I accept what you're saying, Mr. Bourne, but amendments are amendments to the way you presented a case, not necessarily the way that evidence has swung. For example, if the block is red, but we say it's blue, and we've decided it's blue, and that's it, you can't go back and change it to being red. You can just say it was blue, if that makes sense. So this is an amendment that I cannot accept, I'm afraid.
Amendment. Okay, can I make an amendment that changes the way he said things, like make him said other stuff when he did his question?
I will hear it more out of curiosity's sake, but your chances are quite low, and you've been very lucky with the roll, so go ahead, tell me what you have to say, and I'll let you know.
My amendments will be the fact that, well, and some of this has already been brought up, but this is the amendments I would have made if I could, at least. So first of all, I would have made the amendment. Fuck off with that stupid face thing. Okay, the first amendment I would have made is the fact that, yes, it was known that these guys had a rock relationship. I would have not refuted that, especially since, goddammit, wait, hold on a minute. I'm just gonna drag down myself so that doesn't happen all the time.
Good call.
And I'm back on the ground. Good call indeed. The first amendment I want to make is not to try to refute the earlier claim by me that no, you did have a very rocky relationship. But I do agree on the fact that they did decide to have a bit of experiment, try fornicating and maybe dating others to try to improve their relationship between each other. Basically making the wife okay with the fact that, alright, you know what, it's fine if you want to fuck this other girl. Second thing I would want to point out is that the cell phone, if possible, I'm not saying anything now that this is going to bear up. The second point I wanted to point out is the cell phone broke down because he dropped it out of his pocket. And because of that, he's the kind of guy who rather wants to bring his stuff with him when he goes somewhere, even if it's broken. Maybe it would fix itself or work again afterwards. Remember, only the display was shown to be heavily broken. Third part I wanted to have changed is that when he went to the scene of the crime, it was not because he wanted to have a picnic, which would have refuted my claim about the pills and all that stuff anyways, even harder. It was because he had talked with this person to meet up and talk on how they would improve their relationship and all their stuff, because they would have a bunch of stuff too as well. You don't need to object during my amendments, but I guess
objections are allowed during amendments,
doing it
and
anyway.
I will allow him to object, Mr. Bourne. Mr. End, your objection, I assume, to that last point more than anything.
Almost to all of it. So essentially what you're trying to say is you're trying to amend your entire, not only opening,
yes,
but the
I'm
question
trying to amend my
sentencing
entire
to
open.
fit your sections. So you're just trying to completely unfuck up your fuck-ups. Is what I'm getting at.
I mean, that is technically the point of amendments.
But I'm trying to explain.
That's so.
It is,
Yeah,
but
that is
this
specifically the
is
point.
so large, it's so much, that he is essentially
Yes.
trying to remove a large section of my arguments.
Okay, here's
Yes,
what I'm going
and
to
I'm
do
not
at
saying
this
I'm gonna do
point.
that.
I am
I wasn't even
not,
done with the amendments.
Mr. Bourne, I'm
I had
going
even
to
more.
interrupt you for a moment. I'm not going to accept the First Amendment in relation to the relationship. I will accept the Second Amendment that it broke when he fell out of his pocket. However, no further information is known about that, which means it doesn't particularly change anything really, and I'm going to refuse the Third Amendment that you've put forward. So one amendment has been accepted, two have been rejected. I will give you the opportunity to offer two more amendments if you so desire, Mr. Bourne. Mr. End, you may object as you see
Alright.
fit, regardless of what Mr. Bourne claims.
Alright. The second thing I wanted to change is, well, of course, he came there not because he was going to have a picnic. He was going to talk to her about their situation, how they could improve their relationship, and so to say. And then when they was there, this co-worker of his came up there with a knife and stabbed her to death. Of course, this was a knife that was taken from his bakery, so it would make sense for him to have his fingerprint on it as well. The reason to why this co-worker would have done this is because he was very jealous of him fucking this other chick.
Okay. Thank you for
And
your...
therefore he wanted to kill him.
Thank you for your suggested amendments, Mr. Bourne. Outside of the mobile telephone falling out of the pocket, I must reject your other four amendments, as they do change far too much without any real substantial anything to back them up. Although I appreciate the fact you tried. That is the most attempts I've ever seen anyone do at amendments. So thank you for giving me the experience in using amendments, but the only one I will accept is that the mobile telephone broke when they fell out of Mr. Sprett's pockets, which is quite interesting because Mr. Sprett doesn't have any pockets.
Judge?
Yes,
Even
Mr.
worse.
N.
Question about the amendment. The amendment is that is as fact of evidence that it fell out of his pocket, or an amendment is that's what he posed up as.
It is an amendment that this is what the defence have claimed, and there is no other information in relation to it. So we have two counterclaims of you broke the phone to hide the evidence, it fell out your pocket. So it becomes sort of speculation, and I may toss a coin to decide that particular one, or I'll decide myself based on the case.
Really matter at this point.
But technically it doesn't, but it is an example of... It's actually a decent example of how amendments can be used to change when new information is available. Although the other four amendments were just far too much, because it was basically changing everything, and that's a bit too much, even for me, and I'm a fucking idiot. So thank you for your amendments, Mr. Bourne. But at that point then, the lawyers only have one thing left to do, and that is their closing statements.
Closing statement.
Bearing in mind the one amendment that has been put forward about the mobile phones, no other facts of the case have changed as thus, and therefore we will be allowing short and concise statements to sum up your case before I do my judge's summary. And I'm going to allow the defence to present their closing statement first. Mr. Bourne, you may take the floor for the last time in this case, unless I decide to have you executed for some reason.
You can execute me after this. I don't mind. I feel like this gone to shit. Anyways, good kill. Yes, see, I'm smart in the end. Anyway, shut up. Anyways, what?
It's okay, Mr. Bourne. We're just having a laugh.
I know.
apologize if I touched on the line.
Yeah. Anyways, I would like to say this. Look at this beautiful little man. Do you really think somebody as cute as him would be able to commit murder? I mean, come on, guys. Sure, he has had a bad luck with that phone murdering situation and everything, but come on, he's not a murderer. He already said that there was another man at the scene of the crime. This should actually be thoroughly investigated before a good conclusion should be done. If anything, this is just, what would a guy with a paper bag with a bunch of tools go creeping up to somebody he was doing hard that said he had a bit of a problem with each other, and then she all of a sudden dies when he claimed he was going back. There's something isn't right there, and if anything, I think that should be taken in good consideration when making this final decision. Thank you.
Thank you for your closing statement, Mr. Bourne. Short and concise and with some rather interesting information. Incidentally, red pandas are fucking vicious, so I'm just going to leave that there. Mr. End, you may take the floor for the last time to present your closing statement to the court.
I will keep this quick since we've already pretty much covered all of the bases when it comes to the prosecution of Sprett. But I will point out one thing, the fact of the extra individual that was on scene. The reason we are prosecuting Sprett and not this other individual is because we have more evidence to support the fact that Sprett was the one that was actually the one that committed the murder, rather this other anomalous individual. Overall, I believe the timeline that we have put up actually paints a very good picture of what has happened. The witness questioning also made it quite apparent, I believe, what kind of defense the defense is trying to put up here. A more of a story than an actual recounting of evidence and actual events. And other than that, yeah, that's pretty much all I have.
Thank you very much, Mr. N. And with that, we come to an end of the lawyer's jobs in the court case. And first off, I must say thank you very much for your efforts, Mr. Bourne. Thank you very much for your efforts, Mr. N. And thank you very much for your efforts, Mr. Swift. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable court case, as I'm sure people in the gallery will agree as much as the random people sitting next to me. I have really enjoyed this one. So, having heard all the cases, the witness questioning, the amendment and everything else, I am now going to do the judge's summary. There's no questioning from the lawyers or objections, although I may ask some questions of the lawyers if I forget information, which does happen because when I originally started this, I was on desktop and could write things down, but I can't do that anymore. So, without further ado, it's time to do the wonderful judge's summary. Mr. Sprett, please be seated. Mr. Fenn, would you please go and ensure that Mr. Sprett stays in his seat? If he moves, cut his testicles off with the broadsword and use the blunt side. Right! So we start with the prosecution's case, as we did begin with the prosecution. And the first piece of evidence was this one. Now, the prosecution brought up that the accused was in a relationship with the woman who was killed, unfortunately, as well as his wife. Now, the woman who was killed was allegedly somewhat clingy and had brought this ring in an attempt to steal Mr. Sprett away from his wife. I mean, that's what you want to do. Mr. Fenn, please be quiet. Mr. Sprett, please stop playing with the knife. He's a stormtrooper. He can't aim for shit, but he will kill you eventually. There's a good panda. He's managed to stab himself. Anyway, so we brought insight now that this chick on the side was rather jealous. It does happen from time to time. Moving on to the second piece of evidence, we had a cigarette and a lighter. Now, DNA evidence and so forth was brought up in this. I'm not questioned by the defence, which does happen from time to time. I accept that's a thing that happens. And this was to prove that the mistress had been in the house within 2 days, meaning that they had an active relationship at the time, and it is believable that she would respond to a call from Mr. Sprett to meet her at a certain location, something that was technically brought up later on in the case. Moving on to evidence number 3, we had Mr. Sprett's mobile telephone, which, as you can see, is broken. Now, it is only the screen that's broken. The defence did bring up here that, in an amendment, that it had fallen out of Mr. Sprett's pocket, whereas the prosecution claimed that it had been destroyed on purpose to hide evidence. Now, bearing in mind that Mr. Sprett is a red panda, and red pandas do not wear pants with pockets, I cannot accept the defence's amendment that it fell out of his pockets because they simply did not exist. And pockets and clothing were never necessarily brought up. The closest thing, Mr. Bourne, the closest thing that was brought up to clothing that was ever brought up in this case was beard nets, which was very interesting, especially one for a beard that long, but I must go with the idea of the prosecution here, saying that he was attempted to destroy the phone. Somewhat relevant, somewhat not. Of course, the most relevant piece of information, his fingerprints were found on the phone, but that's to be entirely expected. My fingerprints are all over mine. The most important piece of evidence, technically, was the knife. Now, Mr. Sprett, in witness questioning, did admit that this knife belonged to him, as did his lawyer, and that would make sense as to why his fingerprints were on it. However, only his fingerprints were on it. There were no other fingerprints found. Nobody ever questioned this. Nobody ever really brought it up. And the blood and DNA of Miss Sprett, Mrs. Sprett's missus, as the missus we shall refer to her, was found on the knife, meaning that this was indeed the murder weapon used. Now, the prosecution alleges that Mr. Sprett called the mistress out to meet him in secluded woodland away from the home where he lived, where he then murdered her because it was going to lose everything. If this relationship came out and everybody knew about it, he'd lose his wife, he'd lose basically everything, so he attempted to murder his mistress, which is believable with the first piece of evidence, the ring, indicating that she was quite serious about attempting to steal away the Sprett from his actual wife. So, interesting piece of evidence there. I think the prosecution really could have done something here if they'd managed to somehow link the knife into the destruction of the phone as well. For example, saying perhaps the knife's butt had been used to crack the phone and they'd found little pieces of fragments of glass in the ring at the bottom. Yes, this would have come down to a coin toss, but if they won, then they could have linked those two particular items together, which would really have cemented that case against there. But in regard, the case was very strong as it was presented anyway, so very pleased with that case as it went. Now we moved on to the defence's case, which started with evidence number 6. This rose. Now, this rose was sent out by, I believe it was Mr. Sprett to the victim. Is that right, Mr. Bourne? It was sent by Mr. Sprett to the victim, or was it sent by the victim to Mr. Sprett?
Yeah, there was the victim who sent victim to Mr. Sprett.
The victim sent it to Mr. Sprett. Now, this is entirely believable. It's very easy to order a rose and have it sent to somebody, and it's possible that they were in some kind of a fornication, affectionate relationship, and not just a red panda gangbang, which is always a possibility. One thing that was never brought up by the defense or the prosecution was the fact that it was a red panda, but it was a red panda, which of course is a critically endangered creature technically, so you kind of buggered there. But a rose to indicate that there was a good relationship there, and there feasibly nobody who ever sent a rose to anybody could kill anybody. Is that correct? I think was the point the prosecution was making. We then came up with the baguette, which was deemed as a killer piece of evidence because this particular baguette was being baked at the time of the murder, or very close nearby, and according to tests that were done on it, his fingerprints were never found on it. Mr. Bourne was very clear to make sure fingerprints were never found, but DNA testing, which would indicate that Mr. Sprett had spat on it, breathed on it, got his fur in it, which is actually quite a lot worse than your fingerprints when you think about it for a bakery, proved that he is the one that had made it. However, as you know, we had a number game here, and it was quite a bad victory. It was baked within 2 hours of the murder taking place, which means it could place Sprett within the bakery within 2 hours of the murder taking place. Of course, if you'd guessed 9, it would have been baked within 8 minutes of the murder taking place, which would have changed the case entirely, but that's just the way that random chance goes.
Yes, I know.
I do like explaining these things if you can't tell. The next piece of evidence, I believe, was, I think it was the key, we'll go with the pills. I think it was the pills next. We'll go with the pills anyway because they were a very important piece of evidence. Now, these pills were pills that Mr. Sprett was on. These are heavy, heavy relaxants and technically not stimulants, relaxants and sedatives in a way. They make big, large, sweeping motions very hard. They slow your brain movements down, although that wouldn't really bother Sprett that much, to be fair. And they generally chill you out, almost in the way of smoking weed, although I've never smoked weed myself. I've seen my other half do it, and I would believe it had a very similar effect. It also made Mr. Sprett empty his bowels, which might be where some of this DNA evidence came from in relation to the bread. If Mr. Bourne had said that there had been fecal matter in the bread and then brought up, once I said that it made him empty his bowels, that was why, that could have linked that together and really secured the case a little bit better there, but sometimes a thinking like this doesn't necessarily come out. So, according to obviously we had a coin toss here, and Mr. Bourne did win that one. He won every single thing he did in this case, to be fair to him. It was confirmed that, yes, the medication did do that. However, it was brought up at time of a murder, and never massively established when Mr. Sprett was arrested. That was kind of established on the spot, somewhat late. And Mr. Sprett was arrested at a later point, meaning that there was no physical testing that could be done at the time to determine if Mr. Sprett was actually on this medication. I believe this was one of the amendments that Mr. Bourne attempted to make, but it was one of the ones that was rejected because it was just a bit too harsh. But technically an important piece of evidence. Although it's a relaxant, but it doesn't stop you acting entirely. A bit like being drunk, I suppose. And the last piece of evidence that was brought forward by the defence was this key. Now, this key belonged to the victim, and it basically allowed her to go to any property that she owned, or Mr Sprett's house, I believe. It was a sort of universal master key without any actual university, because keys aren't that bloody intelligent. Trust me, I'm a protege. Indicating that they did have quite a good relationship between themselves, unlike, as it was stated at the beginning, Mr Sprett and his wife, who had a bit of a rocky relationship. She was abusive, he put that down to being kinky, but not necessarily a particularly good relationship. So that closes the evidence that was presented. The most information that we really got in relation to the defence. I'm about to burp, I think. How very rude. Excuse me. That Chinese was delicious. Anyway, the most information that we managed to get out of the defence came from the actual witness statement himself. Now, of course, we did have that break there where the defence and the accused went into the back room and discussed, and it's quite believable that since the story came out at that point, that they went into the back to concoct a story that was technically believable, and therefore it actually lowers what was said by Mr Sprett. I consider Mr Sprett, as he was caught out multiple times by questioning from Mr End, to be an unreliable witness, which I don't often do. It's only the second time I've ever deemed anybody to be an unreliable witness, as Mr Sprett was found countering things he had said himself many times over. And at the end, we got a story about an employee who was very religious, a priest, probably called Christian Christiansen, runs around courtrooms going, "Hello there!" and is very, very annoying, going into the woods carrying a bag that you put bread in with tools in it. But bear in mind, those bags are about this big. What tools are you going to get in there for, say, cutting up a body or murdering somebody? Because the implication there, we never said what tools were in it. The implication is the knife was taken. And they went out for a picnic to discuss breaking it off. But they didn't do that. They did something else. So I found the witness to be very unreliable, and I found the defence's case, frankly, to be not quite put together, if you will. And I accept it's quite difficult to be up here and do a court case, and you know, suddenly you find that the people on the other end aren't actually incompetent idiots. They actually know how to string a sentence together, which is quite good. Although we did get the very important distinction out that Sweden is better than Norway, in Mr Sprett's own words. You know what you're going to do. So, yeah.
And that felt like the best case sold ever.
Yes, I think that's your payment. I've got that on film.
Ever.
I've got that on film. That's your payment.
Yeah.
But yes, so all in all, a genuinely interesting case that I have thoroughly enjoyed. However, I could sit here all day and talk, but I'm not going to. Because now, it is time to pass judgment. That means I get my pretty hammer. It's very pretty,
I don't know where
isn't
this
it?
is going.
Don't we all? Mr Sprett, I find the case presented by the prosecution against you fairly watertight in their questioning as well as the evidence they have presented. I could believe, with the way the relationship was put up with your wife and your relationship with the other person, how much you had to lose in such a community, no objections, in such a community, especially bearing in mind that there is obviously a strong Christian community because you have an ex-priest working for you. You had so much to lose that I have no doubt that you took your missus out into the woods under the pretense of discussing the relationship, maybe having a picnic as you said, maybe not, with the intention of murdering her, and you did so violently with a knife, stabbing her multiple times through the chest until she bled to death, before discarding of the knife in the local area, as well as destroying your cell phone, perhaps throwing it away and hitting it against a wood. And therefore, based on the power that I invested in myself, because obviously this is a kangaroo court, the cases are presented and so forth, I find you guilty of premeditated murder in the first degree, and I sentence you to death by having your testicles cut off by Mr. Fenelius and replaced. What shall we do? We're going to cut your testicles off, and we're going to pull your eyeballs out, put your testicles in your eyeballs, and we're going to let the infection kill you. Mr. Fenn, you may begin. Oh, and your wife gets everything.
Oh god.